For more than 40 years, I've watched homeowners spend hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands, trying to get rid of mice. Traps, poison, exterminators coming out 4 times a year. And the surprising part, the part almost nobody wants to hear, is that most of those mice should never have made it inside in the first place. I've been repairing houses since 1979. Roofs, foundations, basements, crawl spaces, barns, farmhouses that were already old when my father was young. And in all that time, in all those houses, I've never once found a mouse problem that started with the mouse. It always started with the building. Always. Somewhere there was a gap, a hole, a soft spot, a piece of trim that pulled away from the siding one winter, and nobody noticed. The mouse just did what a mouse does. It found it. By the time we're finished here, you're going to understand exactly how a mouse thinks, how it finds your house in the first place, how it measures a hole before it even tries to squeeze through it, and how you can stop the whole thing for about $8 worth of material from any hardware store in America. Not a gadget, not a spray, not something you have to keep buying every year. One material, used correctly, in the right places. And I'll tell you now, most people use it wrong. They buy the wrong version of it, they put it in the wrong spot, and 6 months later they're back where they started wondering why it didn't work. But I don't want to give you the answer yet, because the answer by itself won't help you. If I just told you what to buy, you'd go buy it, stuff it in the first hole you found, and the mice would keep coming in through the 4 holes you didn't find. That's the part that matters. Finding the holes. And to find the holes, you have to stop thinking like a homeowner and start thinking like a mouse. Let me tell you about a house in northern Ohio. This was the fall of 1994. A young couple had bought a farmhouse built in 1911. Beautiful place. Big front porch. The kind of house you drive past and slow down for. They called me out because they were hearing scratching in the walls at night, and they'd already spent close to $600 with an exterminator who kept setting traps in the kitchen. He was catching mice 2, 3 a week. But it never ended. That's the thing nobody explained to them. He was catching mice, and they were still losing. I walked the outside of that house for almost 2 hours before I ever went in. And the husband followed me around the whole time, and I could tell he thought I was wasting his money. He finally said, "Jack, the mice are inside. Why are you out here in the yard?" And I told him something my grandfather told me when I was maybe 14 years old, working beside him on a barn roof. He said, "If water's coming through your ceiling, the problem is never on the ceiling." And it's the same with mice. What you see inside is the symptom. The disease is always outside. We found it on the north side, behind an old lilac bush that had grown right up against the foundation. There was a cast iron drain pipe coming out of the wall, and around it, the original mortar had crumbled away over 80 years until there was a gap you could have slipped 3 fingers into. Dark, greasy smear marks all around the edge of it. That's the detail I want you to remember, because I'm going to come back to those smear marks later and tell you exactly what they are and why they're the single most useful clue in the entire yard. Now here's what most people don't understand about mice, and this is where it gets interesting. A house mouse doesn't wander. We picture this little animal roaming the countryside, traveling miles, looking for a warm place. That's not what happens at all. A house mouse spends almost its entire life inside a space about the size of a 2-car garage. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet at the very most from its nest. That's its whole world. It knows every inch of it. It has memorized the route from the nest to the food and back so completely that if you moved a piece of furniture in the middle of the night, it would run straight into it because it isn't really looking. It's running a map it has stored in its head and in its whiskers. Think about what that means. If you have a mouse in your kitchen tonight, that mouse is not from the field down the road. It's living within about 30 feet of where you're standing. In your wall, under your floor, behind your dishwasher, in the insulation above your ceiling. Which sounds like bad news, but it's actually the best news I can give you, because it means the entry point is close. It's findable, and it's almost certainly one of about a dozen places I'm going to walk you through. The other thing to understand is how they move. Mice don't cross open rooms if they can help it. They run along walls. They keep one side of their body in contact with something solid the entire time. Scientists have a word for it, thigmotaxis, but every old exterminator and every farm kid figured this out on their own a long time ago. It's why you find droppings along baseboards and never in the middle of the floor. It's why a trap set out in the open catches nothing, while the same trap tucked against the wall, perpendicular to it, catches something the first night. And the reason for that behavior is fear. A mouse in the middle of an open floor is a mouse that owls, cats, foxes, and hawks have been eating for 15,000 years. The wall is safety. The wall is also, and this is the important part, the highway. When a mouse first finds your house, it doesn't come at it head on. It follows the edge of your driveway, the base of your fence, the line of your garden bed. And then it hits your foundation, and it follows that. It's going to travel the entire perimeter of your home, nose down, whiskers out, at a speed slow enough to inspect everything. And it's going to find whatever there is to find. Which raises a question I get asked on almost every job. How small a hole can a mouse actually get through? And you'll hear people say the size of a dime, or the width of a pencil, and both of those are close enough to be useful. But the reason behind it is more interesting than the number. A mouse's body is almost entirely flexible. The ribs will compress, the spine is loose, the shoulders will collapse inward. There's essentially nothing in that body that can't fold. Except the skull. The skull is one solid piece of bone, and it will not change shape. So the rule is simple. If a mouse's head fits, the mouse fits. Everything behind the head is negotiable. A young adult house mouse has a skull about 1/4 of an inch across at its widest point. A big one, 3/8. That's it. That's the whole barrier between you and them. And they know their own measurements. This is the part that surprises people. Those whiskers on the side of a mouse's face aren't decoration, and they aren't just for feeling around in the dark. A mouse sweeps them forward and back dozens of times a second, and it uses them the way you'd use a pair of calipers. It touches both sides of an opening, and it knows, before it commits, whether its skull will pass. It doesn't guess. It doesn't get stuck very often. It measures. I've watched a mouse sit at the mouth of a gap under a barn door, whiskers going a mile a minute, then turn and go somewhere else. It had already decided. Over the years, I realized that most homeowners were never taught any of this. Nobody sat them down and explained how their own house works. That's one of the reasons I finally put everything I've learned into my homeowner maintenance handbook, organized room by room and season by season. So you're not finding out about a problem after it's already cost you money. The link's below if you want it. Now let's get back to the mice, because this next part is the one that saves people the most money. And it's the part that almost everyone gets backwards. Here's the backwards part. Almost every homeowner in this country responds to mice by trying to kill the mice that are already inside. It feels like the right thing to do. It's the thing every store sells you, and it almost never solves the problem. I want to explain why. because once you understand it, you'll never waste another dollar on it. A female house mouse can start having young at about 6 weeks old. Gestation is right around 3 weeks. She'll have 5 or 6 in a litter, and she can do that 5 to 10 times in a single year. I'm not telling you that to frighten you. I'm telling you because of what it means mathematically. If you have 10 mice in your walls and you kill 8 of them, you haven't removed 80% of your problem. You've removed 80% of the competition for food, and the 2 survivors will breed faster because of it. Rodents do this. When pressure comes off a population, the remaining animals breed harder, and the young survive better. You can trap all winter and be exactly where you started by spring. Meanwhile, the hole is still open. That's the whole thing right there. The hole is still open, and outside that hole, every autumn, there's a new supply of mice looking for somewhere warm. And poison is worse, in my opinion, and I've held that opinion for 35 years. First, the practical problem. A mouse doesn't eat one big meal like a rat does. A mouse nibbles. 20, 30, 40 little feeding stops a night. A few crumbs at each one. So it takes bait from your box, and then it takes something else from under your stove, and then it goes back to the nest inside your wall cavity, and a few days later, it dies in there. In a wall. In the summer. I have cut open plaster walls in July to get at a dead mouse, and I would not wish that smell on anybody. I charged a woman in Kentucky $400 once to open a wall, remove one dead mouse the size of my thumb, patch, prime, and paint. $400 because she spent $9 on poison. And there's the other side of it, which matters to me because I grew up on a farm. The barn owls, the kestrels, the neighbor's cat, the fox that keeps your yard clear of everything else. They eat the slow, sick, poisoned mouse, because a poisoned mouse is easy to catch. That's how it works. You end up killing the very animals that were doing the job for free. I've seen properties where the owners poisoned for 3 years straight and ended up with more rodents than when they started, because they'd wiped out every predator within a half mile. So let's go back outside, where the problem actually lives, and let's talk about those greasy smear marks I mentioned earlier. A mouse's fur carries oil. Every time it squeezes through the same opening, and it will use the same opening hundreds of times, it leaves a trace of that oil behind. Dust sticks to the oil. More oil goes on top. Over weeks and months, you get a dark, waxy smudge that looks a little like somebody rubbed a dirty thumb along the edge. We call them rub marks. On a white painted foundation, they're obvious. On dark brick, you have to get down on your knees with a good flashlight held at a low angle, almost flat against the surface, so the light rakes across it. That's the trick. Straight on, you'll see nothing. Raked across, the smudge jumps out at you. There's a second trail too, and this one you can't see at all, and it's the reason your house is more attractive than your neighbor's. Mice leave tiny drops of urine as they travel. Not by accident, it's deliberate. It's a chemical signature loaded with proteins that carry information, and other mice read it like a road sign. This route is safe. Food is this way. A mouse lived here and did well, which means once one mouse finds your gap and survives the winter in your crawl space, the location of your house is, in a very real sense, published. That's why so many people tell me the same thing. They say, we never had mice for 12 years, and now we get them every single fall. Nothing about the house changed, except that the news got out. And I'll add something that people find hard to believe until they see it. A mouse's sense of smell is extraordinary. They carry over 1,000 working genes devoted to smell. We have somewhere around 400. A mouse standing in your flower bed on a cold October night can smell the inside of your house through a 1/4-inch gap. It can smell warmth, dust, food, and other mice. That gap isn't just a hole to a mouse. It's an open door with a light on and dinner cooking. Now, where are the gaps? Let me take you around a house the way I'd take you around it in person, and I want you to picture your own place while I do it. Start at the garage. If you have an attached garage, that's where I'd put my money 9 times out of 10. Not the middle of the door, the corners. Every overhead garage door in America has 2 bottom corners where the rubber seal meets the vertical track, and there is almost always a small triangular void there. The door looks closed. It is not closed. Get inside the garage in the middle of the day, shut the door, turn off the lights, and just stand there for a minute until your eyes adjust. Every point of daylight you see is a door. I've done that exercise with dozens of homeowners, and I've watched their faces every time. Next, the bottom of every exterior door. Not the garage door, the people doors. Side entry, basement walkout, the door out to the deck. Slide a dollar bill under it and close the door. If you can pull that bill out without any drag, you've got a gap. And a gap that'll pass a dollar bill will pass a young mouse. Door sweeps cost a few dollars, and they're 4 screws. Then the utility penetrations, and this is where I find them most often on newer homes. Every pipe, wire, and line that enters your house came through a hole somebody drilled, and that hole was drilled oversize because it has to be. The air conditioning line set, the gas line, the water spigot, the cable and internet lines, the dryer vent. Whoever ran them may have shot a bead of caulk around them or may have shot a can of expanding foam in there. And I'll tell you in a minute why the foam is a joke. Get down and look at every single one. Then the dryer vent itself and the bathroom and kitchen exhaust vents, because the little flapper doors on the outside get stuck open with lint or corrode until they don't shut. A mouse walks right in through that flap and out into your wall cavity. Then, on a lot of homes, the weep holes in brick veneer, which are there on purpose to let moisture out and shouldn't be sealed. You put a stainless weep hole cover in those, not caulk, because if you block the drainage, you'll trade a mouse problem for a rot problem, and rot costs a lot more. Then the sill plate, where the wood frame of your house sits on top of the concrete foundation. On older homes, and on some sloppy new ones, that joint has voids. Follow it all the way around with your flashlight raking sideways. And then look up, because everybody forgets to look up. Mice climb. They climb rough brick. They climb stucco. They run along cable lines and tree branches like a tightrope. They'll go straight up a downspout. I have found mice entering at roof level more times than I can count. Gable vents with torn screens. Soffit panels that popped loose in a windstorm. The gap where a roof line meets a wall, what we call a kickout, which is a leak waiting to happen anyway. If you've got a tree limb touching your roof, that limb is a bridge, and you should cut it back 8 or 10 feet. That's your map. Now let's talk about the $8. The material is copper mesh. Some people know it as copper wool, and you'll find it sold in rolls, usually 5 feet or 20 feet, at any hardware store or farm supply. And a roll runs somewhere in the range of $8 to $15, depending on the length. Stainless steel mesh works exactly the same way. What matters is that it is copper or stainless, and here's the reason that one detail is everything. If you go buy the ordinary steel wool from the cleaning aisle, the cheap kind, it will work beautifully for about 1 winter. Then it rusts. It swells, it crumbles, It turns to orange powder. It runs a rust stain down your foundation. And by the second year, the hole is open again and you don't know it because you fixed that one already. I've pulled brown dust out of holes that a homeowner swore they'd sealed 3 years earlier. Copper doesn't do that. Stainless doesn't do that. It'll still be there when your grandchildren own the house. Now, why does mesh stop a mouse when a mouse can chew through wood, drywall, soft mortar, aluminum flashing, and lead? Because a mouse's teeth are a chisel. The front incisors never stop growing, close to 1/2 inch a year, and the front face of the tooth is hard orange enamel, while the back is softer. So as the mouse gnaws, the back wears faster than the front, and the tooth sharpens itself permanently like a good plane iron. It's a magnificent piece of engineering, but a chisel needs an edge to bite into. It needs purchase. Copper mesh gives it nothing. There's no edge, no surface, no solid mass. The strands move. When the mouse tries to bite, the mesh flexes away, and the sharp-cut ends of the wire press back into its mouth and its gums. It's not that the mouse can't physically destroy a strand. It's that the whole experience is unpleasant, unproductive, and endless. And a mouse is a practical animal. It quits and goes to find an easier door. Your job is to make sure there isn't one. And here's where almost everyone goes wrong. They use expanding foam by itself. I understand the appeal. It's fast, it's satisfying, it fills everything. But foam is soft, it smells like nothing, and it holds heat. And I have personally cut open foam plugs and found nests inside them. Mice tunnel through that stuff like it's a snowdrift. Foam alone is not a barrier. It is, at best, a wrapper. So the correct method, and this is the whole trick, is 2 layers. First, you pack the copper mesh in. Pack it tight. Use a screwdriver or a putty knife and really stuff it, because loosely placed mesh gets dragged out. You want it compressed, filling the entire depth of that gap, not just capping the front of it. Then, once it's packed, you seal over the face of it with an exterior-grade silicone caulk, or mortar patch if it's masonry, or foam if the gap is large and irregular. The mesh is the thing that stops the teeth. The sealant is the thing that stops the air, the water, and the smell. And it locks the mesh in place so it can't be pulled out. Neither one works alone. Together they last decades. For a gap under a door threshold, you don't use mesh, you use a door sweep. For weep holes, you use the stainless covers. For a dryer vent, you replace the flapper or fit a proper vent hood with a damper. For a gable vent, 1/4-inch galvanized hardware cloth, screwed down, not stapled. But for the pipe penetrations, the foundation cracks, the sill plate voids, the gaps behind the siding at the bottom edge, the mystery holes behind the shrubs, it's mesh and sealant. Mesh and sealant, all the way around the house. I want to tell you about one more house, because it taught me something I still use. Vermont, about 2006, an old cape with a fieldstone foundation. The owner was an engineer, very precise man, and he'd sealed everything he could find. Did a nice job of it too, and he still had mice. He was ready to sell the house over it. I spent a whole morning out there, and I couldn't find it either, and that bothered me more than it bothered him. So I did the thing I do when I'm beaten. I stopped looking for the hole, and I started looking for the trail, down on my hands and knees, flashlight held flat, working along the base of the wall. And I found rub marks on a stone about 18 inches off the ground, not at the bottom, 18 inches up. They went up that stone and across, and they disappeared into a joint behind a piece of trim where an old porch had been torn off in the 1950s, and reframed. The gap wasn't visible from any angle you'd naturally look from. You had to be lying on the ground looking up. $2 of copper mesh. 10 minutes. That was the end of 6 years of mice in that house. The lesson is this: the hole doesn't have to be findable. The trail is always findable. Follow the grease, follow the droppings, follow the noise, and let the mouse show you its own door. And if you truly can't find it, dust a thin line of ordinary flour along the baseboard or the foundation edge at night, in the area where you hear them. In the morning you'll have footprints, and footprints have a direction. One last thing about timing, because this matters. The window is autumn. As the soil cools, generally September through November depending on where you live, mice that spent the summer perfectly happy in a field or a woodpile start testing structures. They're not being aggressive. They're doing what their species has done since the first grain stores were built in the Middle East 15,000 years ago, when the house mouse first attached itself to human settlements and never left. That's a real thing, by the way. We didn't invite them. We invented agriculture, we piled up seed in one place, and they moved in and have been our shadow ever since. Every civilization that has stored food has fought this animal. And they fought it the same way we're talking about. Before there was poison, there were staddle stones. Those mushroom-shaped stone pillars they'd stand a granary on so the rodents couldn't climb up. There were metal collars on posts. There were mud plasters mixed with broken glass and pottery packed into wall joints. Not one of those is a trap. They're all barriers. Every culture that solved this problem solved it by exclusion. And then we spent about a century forgetting that and buying products instead. So go out on a decent afternoon this fall, before the first hard cold, and walk your foundation. Take a flashlight, even in daylight, and hold it flat to the surface. Take a pencil, and anywhere the pencil goes in, mark it with chalk. Cut your shrubs back a foot from the wall so you can see. Move the woodpile away from the house, and get it up off the ground while you're at it. Then go around with your copper mesh and your caulk gun and close every mark you made. It'll take you an afternoon. It'll cost you less than a tank of gas, and it'll outlast every trap, every bait station, and every service contract you'll ever be sold. You'll sleep better too, not because of the mice, because you'll know your own house. And there's a quiet kind of confidence in that, which I've watched come over people again and again over 45 years. A house stops being a mystery and starts being something you understand. The best mouse you'll ever deal with is the one that never finds a way inside. If you enjoy learning the old-fashioned ways of protecting your home before problems turn expensive, consider subscribing. Every week, I share another lesson I've picked up after a lifetime of repairing American homes.